I think for one group in particular, this is basically the perfect machine. So stick around to find out if you're part of that group. Welcome back to the Freemilesmc, and we're standing here with a very unique motorcycle, the Kawasaki Versys 1000 SE. And this is a very special machine, as from the way it's now standing here, it's kind of undecisive if this road-focused machine is like more derived from a naked bike or from a travel enduro. It's kind of in the middle between the worlds, which makes it very fascinating to me. And also, with it kind of being a bit travel enduro-ish with like road focus, it has a 4-cylinder, an inline 4 in a bike like that. That is very unique. I think there is no other bike that has this. The only thing that kind of comes to mind is the Ducati Multistrada, and that has a V4. And apart from that, you have an old Yamaha FC1000 Dakar bike. And apart from that, this is kind of a very unique setup. I mean, you could compare this bike to the Tracer 09 or to the Suzuki GSX Sport Tourer thing, but it wouldn't really do the bike justice, as the way it's standing here, it's not a fully like sport tourer. It's a very weird in-between bike. That makes me so curious about this machine. And as I already mentioned, the bike has an inline 4. This inline 4 is producing 120 horsepower at 9,000 RPM and 100 Newton meters at 7,000 RPM. It is Kawasaki's typical 1000 engine. They just detuned it to have more mid-way punch. And apart from that, this bike is like the absolute wet dream of tech fans, because this bike has an insane amount of tech. You have a semi-adjustable suspension, and I cannot even fathom what is semi about it, as it's like adjustable in 4 different ways. You have, I actually need to take out my notes because there's no way in me remembering all that. You have an up and down quick shifter, and speaking of that, you have Kawasaki's special technique of you not being able to switch into second gear when you are in first gear at a stop, to kind of make it very easy to switch into neutral. And there's some kind of technique going on that it's basically impossible when you're driving in first gear to shift up into neutral when you want to go into second and just rev bomb the bike. So that doesn't happen. And you have an adjustable anti-hopping clutch. You have 3 levels of traction control, and it is also completely off-switchable. You have wheelie control, and you have a race-developed intelligent braking system that includes like data from the engine. And so that's kind of special, as it's not just like the data that the bike gets from the road and from the tires, but also mixed with like your throttle inputs and all that kind of stuff. And you have Kawasaki's race-developed intelligent cornering management system, which also includes engine data that gets its data from a 6-axis IMU from Bosch. And this whole tech setup basically results in you having a crazy amount of adjustability, and also getting so much data fed back into your DFT dash, like all kinds of crazy stuff, like all this data that like those systems need to work, you can actually see in the dash. Like you can see how much the bike is leaned over, you can see your brake inputs, and you can see how much throttle you're basically giving the bike. It's an insane amount of feedback that the bike is basically giving you. I'm really curious how getting all this info fed back to you actually influences your riding. And also, this bike has a 21-liter tank and dual front disc brakes, which is absolutely necessary at a weight of 260 kilos. Also, this bike comes with cornering lights, so that the bike lights out the turn in front of you basically while turning. And it has the typical sports bike-ish wheels with the typical sports bike tire setup. So I'm really curious how this whole package will behave. As a start, how is it to sit on this machine? For context, I'm 6'5" or 1 meter 96 centimeters. And to kind of get onto this machine, you kind of need to do the whole Jean-Claude Van Damme kick movement to get over here, because the bike is very high. It has 84 centimeters of a seat height, and also the rear is very high. Like getting your leg over that is kind of a challenge. That could get quite interesting for people below 1 meter 80. So yeah, let's see how this whole thing does on the road with its wide handlebar and like and like sport tour, travel, enduro-ish setup? I'm actually very curious. So we're now with the Kawasaki Versys 1000 here on the road, and for a 1000cc bike, this bike handles very nicely. Like you can, this is not a scary bike, which is nice, because at like this power point there are bikes that literally make you fear for your life, and this bike doesn't do that, while still being plenty fast, I have to say. Yeah, as you see, this bike is plenty fast. Like, you'll open up the throttle and you're going a lot quicker than you should be going. And the wind protection is very, very great. Like, I could almost just open up my visor here. Except that I'm leaning off the bike, of course, and I feel how I'm getting out of the wind protection, of course. The body position, by the way, at the same time is so comfortable. And for these turns where you rather lean the bike underneath you than lean you off the bike, you get like a chunky motard feeling. Like it feels like you're sitting on a very thick supermoto. You can right here just lean the bike underneath you, have your own body weight basically still at the middle, and the bike does the work for you. And you don't feel that the bike is 260 kilos. Like, here you get what I mean? You do feel that the bike is heavy, but you feel it in the right way, because the bike feels stable and planted on the road like a Varadero, but nimble like quite a sporty machine. After here turning around, let's see what the bike does acceleration wise. Yeah, like you expected at 1000cc, of course the bike is blisteringly fast, but it's still comprehensible. It's not the whole like 1000cc feeling of oh my god, what is even happening, but like I like it. I like it, I have to say. I like that it's like it's a 1000cc, but it's like somewhat manageable, and for a street orientated bike with this much of an engine, like, that's quite the statement, to be honest. That it's like still manageable. In the real performance top end of the machine, of when you really, really want to push it on the street, you could get into some slight complaining about how the suspension adjusts. Like, I feel like this is more a front issue than a rear issue. I feel more confidence in the rear than to the front of the bike, which is unusual. But this is a very minor complaint. Like that I just said, that is really like complaining on a very high degree. Also, the bike feels comfortable in every gear. Like you feel like you can, of course your cornering is better if the revs are up, you know, and the gear is right, but you can corner this bike in any gear. Now when here overtaking the cyclist, let's talk a bit of how like the whole bike feels comfort-wise. You really nicely sit on this machine. The foot pegs are exactly where you would want them to be. The handlebar feels very travel enduro-ish. You have a very, very upright position. The comfort is really great on this machine. You could sit for hours on this. Like my feet are exactly where I would put them to sit comfortably on a motorcycle. The windshield is so big, it takes away so much of the wind. Of course, what's interesting is like, how does the electric feedback now influence the riding? So I have to say, with the up and down quick shifter, this bike almost feels like it's semi-automatic, to be honest. Like you can shift this bike like a car with paddle shifters almost. You know, like this is here now going up, It's all very smooth, not as aggressive as on a naked bike. Yeah, I'm not myself a big quick shifter person. I like grabbing my own gears. But if you like this kind of stuff, it's really good, and it's also nice for comfort for just cruising, to be honest. Apart from that, you get, like, even though it's so comfy and cushy, you get like a lot of feedback from the road. You know exactly what's going on the machine. You know exactly when you're losing traction, and even the brakes give you some feedback. If you like brake hard into a turn, the lever starts pulsing, and kind of like on a PlayStation controller a bit. Apart from that, you have this lean angle sensor. I think that's a nice little gimmick, but does it really, like, at the beginning I was really curious about how that influences your riding, if you know like how far you're already taking the bike. And I gotta say, I expected a bit more feedback from that, because you're very quickly at the maximum of the lean angle. Maybe the bike is telling you to chill a bit if you go to that level already, because then you're already going quite fast on the street. But not gonna lie, when the thing is in the red area, you could still do 20-30% more. Of course, we're not doing that because I really like being alive, and you know, but you're definitely not reaching close to where the limit of the lean angle sensor tells you, oh yeah, we're now in the red area and your lean angle is full. No, your lean angle is not full. Apart from that, you really nicely see everything that you need to see in the DFT display. I really like that you have like a half analog display where the RPMs are shown still with a gauge, and you have the speed that you quickly can see how fast you're going, and at the same time all the other info is really nicely well represented. You always see how much like range you still have. You can flip through the informations. You see how much fuel you still have. The suspension is very quickly adjustable. I now have it on one person with with luggage, basically. That's now how the bike is set up, because I'm a bit of a heavier individual, and that's actually so cool that, like, basically just at the flip of a button, if you want to put your girlfriend or your buddy on the back, just like with the press of a button, the suspension is adjusted. And that's a big one with this bike, I feel like, because at the end of the day, it's all about usability, and that is such a big one with usability, because you can just be like, oh yeah, I want to go for a ride, press the button, suspension is perfectly adjusted. That's so cool. One thing I really like about this bike promises to do one thing, and it does that one thing really, really good. It's not like, oh, I'm the big adventure bike, take me off-road or whatever. No, like, who can take these bikes off-road anyway? They're super heavy. It's almost forbidden, like, everywhere. If you're touring across Europe, you're basically just on the road all the time. I barely see travel bikes with any kind of, like, rough tires anyway. Like, literally the only time I've seen like a travel bike with some proper enduro-ish like knobby tires on them were the test bikes from 1000 PSTV, when I randomly ran into them on like a motorcycle trip. Apart from that, those bikes never are equipped with that, because no one actually does that. And this bike cannot do that, but it can do the whole roadside very, very good. Very good. Like, it's not completely to the degree of a very dedicated naked bike or a super sport, but like, for it being such a comfy travel bike, wow, this is very nice. Very nice, very cool. Really enjoying this. Like, definitely a fan. So, I have now spent the day on the Kawasaki Versys 1000 SE, and I have to say, all in all, this is an amazing bike. And I think for one group in particular, this is basically the perfect machine. So stick around to find out if you're part of that group. First of all, the handling is really, really good. You always have a very good feel for the road and how the tires are touching the asphalt surface and what kind of bumps are in the road. That's also mainly because of the semi-active suspension, and it does a really, really good job. And the bike, all in all, kind of feels like a fat supermoto. Like you have a lot of like technical driving where you do like counter steering and do all these things like very consciously. And I have to say, I really like that, because that's kind of where the fun for me is in motorcycle riding, really like applying things on the motorbike and the bike reacting in that way. When it comes to the handling, there are only two small little drawbacks. Sometimes you have to do a bit more counter steering in the middle of the turn again to adjust, and yeah, potentially someone could maybe run out of like forearm to counter steer. And also the other very, very tiny little complaint, it almost does not count as a complaint because it's so little. The front can feel uneasy if you really push it, but this is not a super sport, this is not a naked bike, this is like a touring bike. So I think this is fine, but I think it's a bit odd because the rear is still like really good, and I think it has something to do with how the suspension then automatically adjusts itself. But apart from that, really, really good handling, and it's very intuitive, very fun, and it really proves if you focus on one thing, that thing becomes really, really good. If you say, okay, we make a travel bike that has like an enduro-ish position, but it's just a road bike, it can be a really, really good road bike. And I think the Versa 1000 is really a good case study for that. So let's talk about all the tech features. I was very curious how it will actually affect my riding, and of course the semi-active suspension does its job really nice, and that's all good, but like all the other stuff gives me useful information that I sometimes like to know, but apart from that, it doesn't do much. For example, the whole like lean angle sensor basically always maxes out and doesn't really give you an accurate picture of what you're doing, as I'm pretty sure that most people will completely max out the lean angle sensor. But it's nice to have all these informations, and yeah, for all the really tech enthusiastic people, it must have them foaming at the mouth, because for that it's like really amazing. It has everything that you could desire in that aspect. So let's talk a bit about the visuals of the bike. Many people call this bike ugly, and I have to agree, but the problem is this bike is not really ugly compared to all the other adventure bikes, because all adventure bikes are ugly, and this is not more ugly or less ugly. This is just as ugly as all the other ones. So I would say this is really fine. Also, it follows the Kawasaki design language. You can be a fan of that or not. And also, it comes in the typical Kawasaki colors as well. This one is now white. I think in white and black you can make a really good case for this bike. It's an odd color combination that most of the time doesn't work, but on this one it really works nicely. In the beginning, when I made the announcement for the bike with my white sun-bleached hoodie, it made for quite a cool combination, and it looks a bit like a shark with the white, and it really helps that then the inner rim of the rims is like blue, which kind of adds to that whole feeling. And this bike is a very function over form machine, so like really grading its looks like that harshly is not a nice thing. And the bike has an enormous, very practical windshield. If this bike would have any more windshield, you would be sitting on a BMW C1 scooter. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. Like, judging a bike that has that much functionality over its looks is kind of pointless. One thing I do want to add though when it comes to the looks, I'm kind of a fan of the rear taillight. That has some taste to it, it looks really unique, and I really like the key. The key is gorgeous, and the key is one of the contact feelings that you have with the motorcycle all the time. And in addition to that, about the key, there are other motorcycle brands like Ducati. I remember as a kid, I did play with my dad's VW Passat key, like a 1999 Passat. And then I worked in a motorcycle dealership like 20 years later, and I ended up with the same key in my hand. That's not good. Like, if other motorcycle companies put that little emphasis on their keys, that's a bit sad. In addition to that, this bike has an enormous tech package, everything that you want, but it doesn't have keyless key. And I think that's a good thing. One thing about the key looks really gorgeous. It looks like out of a Transformers film, and it's not a keyless key. And I really like that because this is a very tech-focused bike that has all the bells and whistles, but it doesn't have keyless key. Why is that? First of all, it drains your battery because the key is constantly closed. The second reason, it is incredibly easy to become a victim of a relay attack when you have a keyless key system, as it just takes one framed wire antenna for $2 to intercept your key signal and unlock your motorcycle, and everyone with an 8th grade physics knowledge can do that. This practical key approach brings me to the rest of the bike. Everything on this bike is function over form, and that is really, really nice. This is the perfect bike if you just like riding and don't care about anything else. It's a big and heavy bike. It's still incredibly maneuverable. You kind of feel like a motorcycle cop when doing like U-turns. It's so cool, and I'm pretty sure a bike like this will actually see big use in law enforcement because it is basically the perfect bike for road use while still being incredibly comfortable. And it takes all those things that suck about motorcycle riding and finds a solution for it. If you're freezing on the bike because you constantly have wind on your chest, you have this enormous windshield. You barely have any sound on your helmet from the windshield. The big handguards protect almost your arms from all the wind, and like everything is cushy and soft on this bike. Like shifting down, if you reach the point where you cannot shift down any further, instead of like it just being a hard like connect, you softly push into it. It's so nice. It's so well like thought through. You have heating grips. You have an incredible amount of adjustability. The bike feels really comfortable. Like you have zero problems with your back. I'm a quite tall person. I am someone who notices this kind of stuff very quickly on the bike. It is very comfortable. All the contact points feel really soft, but they still feel impactful enough. For example, the clutch. The clutch is very easy to pull. Even if you're not a fit person, you can pull this thing all day. It still has enough weight though. I don't like the completely super easy clutches on naked bikes. And apart from that, it's all-out comfort with a lot of performance at the same time. I think there's a certain group for who this bike is perfect for. Very often when I'm on my motorcycle, I see couples on motorbikes. Like this is the perfect bike for if you and your partner, you and your wife, you and your husband want to go out riding. Many couples actually entertain motorcycle riding as their hobby together, and I see them often on like KTMs and GSs. And let's be honest, they never go off-road with these kinds of bikes. This is the perfect bike for them because most of the time they're older. The main person that rides motorbikes most likely has ridden a 4-cylinder, so they have all the 4-cylinder fun if they're on their own. And then they can so easily switch the suspension to a setup where you can take another person on the back. It literally takes less than 5 seconds to adjust the suspension perfectly for you having your wife on the back or your girlfriend. Amazing. And at the same time, this bike has been thought through so well. You have 21 liters in the tank. You have 28 liters of luggage space if you have like a top case. Then of course you can store more stuff in the side panels as well, as you don't have a high swept up exhaust. If you're going traveling with this bike and you want to go camping, Kawasaki equipped this motorcycle kickstand with a plate underneath the kickstand so your bike doesn't dig itself into the ground and falls over. For my own motorcycle trips, I constantly have to put like a plate under that for my bike to not fall over. It's such a cool thing that they thought of this. From a price point, these bikes new cost 17 grand. That's quite pricey, but compared to all the other big adventure bikes, that's comparable. And with the tech package, the owner of this motorcycle who gave it to me for this video has got this bike on the used market with 13,000 kilometers on the clock for 10,000 bucks. And there are different trim models that are below the SE, which then don't have the super fancy self-adjusting suspension, all that kind of crazy stuff. And they can go as low as 10 grand, which is a very good price, as like the cheapest way to get into a big ADV bike is, I think, the Moto Morini, and the Moto Morini sucks off-road and has an engine that I don't particularly like from its mapping mostly, and that one is like 10k. So if you are a couple and want to ride motorcycles together as your hobby, this is basically your bike. This is the perfect one. If that's you, just go out and buy it basically. For everyone else, you still get a really capable touring machine, and all in all, I have to say I'm super satisfied with the bike. Sadly, there are a few little minor critique points. You have to use more than one hand to adjust the windshield, so you have to pull over. You have to be a bit of a taller rider because you really have to lift your leg over the high tail of the bike, or have to like lift your bike over the middle. And that can become a bit difficult. And if you cannot do that, you have to constantly put the bike onto the center stand to then step onto it over the foot pegs. And that just ruins the usability of it, as this is all about quick and easy use, as I talked about with the super easy suspension setup for when you want to take a passenger. That was it on the Kawasaki Versys 1000 SE. Really happy to have reviewed this motorbike. It's quite a cool one. And I hope you guys liked it. Definitely subscribe and ring the bell, and see you guys in the next one.